the echoes in the drywall. The house in Oak Ridge was built with cheap, modern materials disguised as luxury. It had quartz countertops that stained if you left a lemon slice on them for more than an hour, and drywall so thin you could hear a sigh from 2 rooms away. Clara knew every sound the house made. She knew the groans of the floorboards in the hallway, the metallic click of the downstairs thermostat, and the specific, heavy thud of her husband Julian's briefcase when he dropped it by the door at 6:30 p.m. Lately, though, there was a new sound. It was the sound of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, pressurized silence that exists right before a storm breaks. Julian was a partner at a mid-sized architectural firm. He was 42, with a hairline that was beginning to retreat but a posture that remained stubbornly rigid. He was a man who lived by straight lines and blueprints. For 12 years, Clara had been the soft edges of his life, organizing his dinners, ironed shirts, and social calendars. Then came Vivienne. Vivienne was the new junior interior designer at the firm. She was 26, smelled permanently of expensive jasmine oil, and possessed an innate ability to make every room she entered feel slightly smaller, slightly hotter, and entirely focused on her. She didn't walk, she drifted, her silk skirts making a faint, rhythmic shhhshhh against her legs. Clara met her for the first time at the firm's summer gala. Vivienne had worn a dress the color of spilled red wine, silky, backless, and entirely inappropriate for a corporate event. "Julian talks about you constantly," Vivienne had said, her voice a low, honeyed purr. She had extended a hand with nails painted a pale, milky white. As Clara took it, Vivienne didn't look at Clara's face, her eyes flicked down to Clara's vintage pearls, then to her sensible block heels, and finally over Clara's shoulder to find Julian, who was watching them from the bar with a glass of scotch held too tightly in his hand. "Does he?" Clara had replied, keeping her voice level. "He rarely mentions the office at home." Vivienne laughed, a musical, practiced sound that went up a full octave. "Oh, Julian separates church and state. I admire that about him. But at the office, well, we work very closely. He's teaching me so much about structure." The word hung in the air, greasy and suggestive. Vivienne's eyes returned to Clara, gleaming with a bright, predatory amusement. She wasn't trying to hide it. In fact, she seemed to derive a specific, sharp pleasure from letting Clara see exactly what she was doing. It was a game to her, a display of effortless power. The shift. By autumn, the game had moved from the office to the periphery of Clara's daily life. It started with small things. A lingering scent of jasmine on the passenger seat of Julian's Audi. A receipt for a dinner for 2 at a French bistro downtown on a Tuesday night when Julian had claimed he was stuck in a zoning board meeting. Then, the texts began. They didn't arrive on Julian's phone, he kept that locked and face down on the nightstand. They arrived in the way Julian spoke, the way he looked at Clara with a mix of impatience and profound boredom. "Do you ever think about changing your hair?" Julian asked one Sunday morning, looking up from his tablet. Clara was pouring coffee. "My hair?" she asked, touching the neat, dark bob that had been her signature since their college days. "I don't know. Just something softer. Longer. Less." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "Less severe." Vivienne was saying that angular cuts can make a person look older than they are. Clara set the coffee pot down. The porcelain clicked against the counter. "I didn't realize Vivienne was an expert on my appearance." Julian's face flushed slightly, a guilty pink creeping up his neck. "She's a designer, Clara. She studies aesthetics." It wasn't a personal attack. "Of course not," Clara said softly. But it was. It was a coordinated campaign. Vivienne was everywhere. She began leaving small tokens of her presence in Julian's pockets, a silver earring found in the glove compartment. "Oh, Vivienne must have dropped it when we drove to the site visit," Julian stammered, a tube of pale pink lip gloss in his briefcase, a handwritten note on heavy cardstock tucked into a folder of blueprints. "Thank you for the late-night guidance on the Miller project. You're a wonderful mentor." The word mentor was written in a loopy, exaggerated script, with a tiny, stylized heart dotting the I. Clara didn't scream. She didn't throw plates. She was a woman raised on discretion and dignity, the daughter of an accountant and a librarian. She believed in evidence, and she believed in patience. Instead of confronting Julian, she began to watch. She watched the way he checked his watch every 10 minutes on Saturday afternoons. She watched the way he sneaked into the guest bathroom to answer phone calls, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. And she watched Vivienne. Vivienne's social media was public. It was a carefully curated exhibition of a specific kind of lifestyle, rumpled linen sheets, half-empty wine glasses against city skylines, and captions filled with double meanings. In October, Vivienne posted a photo of a bouquet of deep red roses sitting on her marble kitchen counter. The caption read, "He knows exactly what I need after a long week. #Secret Splendor." In the background of the photo, partially obscured by the shadow of a cabinet, was a distinctive, expensive leather umbrella stand. It was a limited edition piece Julian had bought during their trip to Florence 3 years ago. He had told Clara last week that he must have left it in his office. Clara stared at the photo on her laptop screen for a very long time. The house around her was perfectly quiet. She felt a strange, cold sensation wash over her, not of sadness, but of profound clarity. The grief of the betrayal had passed through her weeks ago, leaving behind a hard, crystalline residue of anger. Vivienne wasn't just taking her husband. She was mocking her. She was dangling her conquest in front of Clara's face, waiting for Clara to break, to cry, to file for a messy divorce that would leave Julian bitter and easily moldable in Vivienne's manicured hands. Clara closed the laptop. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and began to make a grocery list. She needed milk, eggs, and a very specific type of resolve. The invitation. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later. The firm had won a major contract for a luxury high-rise downtown, and Julian was ecstatic. He announced that he wanted to host a celebratory dinner party at their house for the core team. "Just a small group," Julian said, avoiding her eyes as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "David, Marcus, Sarah from accounting, and, well, we should probably invite Vivienne since she did the interior pitches." "Of course," Clara said, her voice smooth as silk. "We must invite Vivienne. She's been such a large part of your success lately." Julian stiffened, his eyes meeting hers in the glass. For a second, a flash of panic crossed his face, but Clara smiled warmly, and the panic melted back into his usual self-absorption. "Great. I'll let her know. Keep it elegant, Clara. First impressions for this new client are everything." The night of the dinner party arrived, cold and drizzly. The house was immaculate. Clara had spent the entire day preparing a classic beef bourguignon that filled the house with the rich, heavy scents of red wine, rosemary, and garlic, a perfectly set table with her mother's silver, and jazz playing softly through the built-in speakers. The guests arrived in a cluster around 7 p.m. Vivienne was the last to walk through the door. She wore a dress made of slippery, emerald green silk that clung to every curve. It had a plunging neckline and a slit that rose high up her thigh. She smelled strongly of her signature jasmine, a scent that immediately clashed with the rich, savory aroma of the dinner. "Clara, darling," Vivienne cried, stepping forward to offer a theatrical, air kiss next to Clara's cheek. "The house looks so cozy. Very traditional." "Thank you, Vivienne," Clara said, smiling widely. "Please, come in. Let me take your coat." As Vivienne slid out of her heavy wool coat, she deliberately leaned toward Julian, who was standing just behind Clara. Her bare shoulder brushed against his chest, and she let out a low, familiar laugh. "Julian, you look exhausted. Are you staying up too late again?" Julian coughed into his hand, his face turning a deep crimson. "Just busy, Vivienne. Lots of work." Throughout the dinner, Vivienne dominated the room. She drank her wine quickly, her laughter ringing out across the table, loud and sharp. She spoke of her design philosophy with a flippant, aggressive confidence, frequently touching Julian's arm to emphasize a point. "Julian understands what I mean," Vivienne said, her eyes flashing with malice as she looked across the table at Clara. "We have the exact same taste. We both love things that are bold, uncompromising. Some people are just too afraid of color, don't you think?" David, one of the senior partners, looked uncomfortable and shifted in his seat. Sarah from accounting stared fixedly at her plate. Julian looked like a man sitting on a ticking bomb, terrified but entirely transfixed by the woman beside him. Vivienne shifted her weight under the table. Clara noticed the subtle movement of Vivienne's leg, the way her green silk skirt parted to reveal a long line of thigh. Beneath the tablecloth, Clara knew, Vivienne's foot was pressing against Julian's leather shoe. Julian's hand, resting on his knee, was trembling. "I think color is wonderful," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension with a quiet, razor-like precision. "But a good foundation is what actually matters. Without structure, Vivienne, everything eventually collapses under its own weight. Don't they teach you that in school?" Vivienne's smile hardened. Her eyes narrowed into two cold slits. "School can only teach you so much, Clara. Some things require natural talent. A natural connection to the material." "Of course," Clara replied smoothly, standing up to clear the plates. "Excuse me, I'll bring out the dessert." The confrontation in the pantry. Clara was in the kitchen, slicing the tart, when she heard the shhhshhh of silk behind her. She didn't turn around. She expected this. "You really are a remarkable housewife, Clara," Vivienne said. She was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, a freshly poured glass of red wine in her hand. Her posture was deliberately loose, almost sloppy, but her eyes were sharp and vicious. The beef was delicious. A bit heavy for my taste, but Julian seemed to enjoy it. He loves heavy things, doesn't he? Things that tie him down. Clara carefully wiped the knife with a damp cloth. He has a hearty appetite, Vivienne. In all things. Vivienne chuckled, stepping fully into the kitchen. She walked closer, until she was standing just inches from Clara, her jasmine perfume filling Clara's lungs like a toxic gas. Vivienne reached out a white-nailed finger and traced the edge of the marble island. "How long have you two been married?" 12 years? Vivienne asked, tilting her head. "That's a long time to spend with someone who doesn't look at you anymore." Clara turned to face her. She didn't look angry, she looked curious, the way an entomologist looks at a particularly bright, destructive beetle. "Is that what he told you?" "He doesn't have to tell me," Vivienne purred, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She leaned in, her eyes shining with the pure, unadulterated thrill of the cruelty she was about to inflict. "I can feel it. Every time he touches me, Clara. Every time he calls me from the car because he can't bear the thought of walking into this quiet, dead house. He's drowning, and you're the anchor." Vivienne took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. She was waiting for the tears. She was waiting for the slap, the scream, the breakdown that would validate her power. Instead, Clara smiled. It was a small, tight, entirely terrifying smile. "You're very young, Vivienne," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a weight that made Vivienne's smile falter. "And because you're young, you think you're the first person to ever discover fire. You think because you are loud, and because you are available, that you are special." Clara stepped forward, forcing Vivienne back half a step. "Julian is a weak man," Clara continued, her voice steady and chillingly calm. "He likes beautiful things because he has no internal beauty of his own. He buys expensive cars, he builds expensive houses, and when he feels old, he finds a girl like you, someone cheap disguised as something luxury, just like this drywall. You aren't a grand romance, Vivienne. You're a cliché. You're the midlife crisis he can't afford, wrapped in synthetic silk." Vivienne's face drained of color. The smug satisfaction vanished, replaced by a raw, ugly rage. Her hand shook, spilling a few drops of red wine onto the white countertop. "You think you can keep him?" Vivienne hissed, her voice losing its honeyed tone, turning sharp and grating. "He hates you. He told me you're a ghost. He's going to leave you, Clara. We're already looking at apartments downtown." "Then take him," Clara whispered, her face inches from Vivienne's. "Take him. But do you really think a man who leaves his wife of 12 years for a girl who leaves her underwear in his briefcase is going to stay with you when your skin starts to sag? When a 22-year-old intern walks into the office? You're a temporary rental, Vivienne. And the security deposit is already gone." Vivienne raised her hand, her face contorted in fury, as if she were about to throw the wine in Clara's face. "Is everything all right in here?" Julian's voice broke the tension. He was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, looking nervously between the two women. In an instant, Vivienne transformed. The rage vanished, replaced by a trembling, fragile vulnerability. She dropped her head, her lower lip quivering as she looked at Julian. "Julian," Vivienne whimpered, her voice cracking with forced emotion. I think I should leave. Clara was she was saying some really horrible things to me." Julian looked at Clara, his expression hardening into a defensive anger. "Clara, what is the meaning of this?" Clara didn't blink. She reached over, took the plate of sliced dessert, and handed it to Julian. "Nothing at all, darling," Clara said, her voice returning to its perfect, pleasant hostess register. Vivienne was just realizing that she doesn't have the stomach for what's served in this house. "Please, take this out to the guests. I'll help Vivienne find her coat." The cleanup. The dinner party ended shortly after. Vivienne left in a flurry of tears and dramatic sighs, pulling Julian out to the porch to apologize for the scene, though her eyes over his shoulder were fixed on Clara with venomous hatred. The other guests left quickly after, sensing the radioactive fallout in the air. By midnight, the house was silent again. Julian stood in the kitchen, watching Clara as she methodically washed the wine glasses. The anger he had tried to conjure earlier had dissipated, replaced by a hollow, pathetic anxiety. "We need to talk," Julian said, his voice flat. "We do," Clara agreed, not looking up from the sink. She's important to the firm," Julian stammered, trying to find a footing on a floor that was rapidly sliding out from under him. "Whatever you said to her, it was unprofessional. You embarrassed me." Clara turned off the water. She dried her hands on a towel, then turned to face her husband. She looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how she had ever found his rigidness comforting. He wasn't strong, he was just stiff. "I didn't embarrass you, Julian. You embarrassed yourself the moment you let a girl who smells like cheap perfume dictate how your wife should cut her hair," Clara said. She walked over to the kitchen table, picked up her laptop, and opened it. She turned the screen toward him. It was a digital folder filled with screenshots of Vivienne's social media, bank statements showing Julian's expenditures on jewelry and hotel rooms, and a log of text messages she had downloaded from their shared iPad link. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He went completely pale. "Clara. It's not what it looks like. It was just a distraction. A mistake." "It's exactly what it looks like," Clara said calmly. "And it's no longer my problem." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, setting it on the counter with a soft clink. It was a silver earring, the one Vivienne had left in the Audi. "Give this back to her," Clara said. "And tell her that when the moving truck comes next week, she can have the Italian leather umbrella stand too. I never liked it anyway." Clara walked out of the kitchen, her steps light and unhurried. As she climbed the stairs, she heard the house groan slightly under her weight. For the first time in months, the sound didn't bother her. The walls were thin, the structure was weak, but she was finally stepping out of the house before it came crashing down.